Welcome to Tucker Carlson today. So here are two things we know conclusively. Having a family, which is the most ancient custom there is for most people the source of the deepest joy and satisfaction. On their deathbeds, famously, very few people look back at their time at the office and wish they'd had more of it. They wish they'd had more time with their own children. So having families is the deepest desire of most people. Not everybody, but most people. We know that. Here's the other thing we know. Fewer people are having families because it's harder than ever. Now, why is that? Why is there such a fundamental disconnect between what people want and what they're getting? Well, maybe there are forces at work preventing people from getting what they want. And that's the topic of this book and the conversation we're about to have. The book, which is written by Kimberly Ells, is called The Invincible Family: Why the Global Campaign to Crush Motherhood and Fatherhood Can't Win. And as noted, Kimberly Ells is the author, and she joins us in studio. Kimberly, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So, thank you for writing this book. We were just talking off camera about how difficult it is to write a book, and this is a meaty book, this is a serious book. But you've got 5 kids, you've got a lot else going on in your life. Like, why did you take 3 years to write this?
Well, there are a couple things that brought me to the table and brought me to this project. I didn't set out to write a book, but the first thing was I became acquainted with the Children's Sexual Rights Campaign. One day I was just doing some research on a totally different topic, and online I came across this document. It was called the Exclaim document, and it was published by International Planned Parenthood Federation. And
so it's got to be wholesome, right there. You know it's a good thing.
Right. I didn't realize who it was by at first until I got reading, and I thought, what is this? And so what it was a document of 10 principles outlining sexual rights for youth, for children. And I couldn't believe that it was real at first. I thought this must be parody, where did this come from? And so I got looking into it more, and I realized it was International Planned Parenthood was the publisher. And I was very concerned about this. So once I realized that it was real.
I'm sorry to ask you to pause. I'm not familiar with this.
Sure.
What would the sexual rights of children be exactly?
Well, I'm going to tell you, and it's all in the book as well. But so the underlying premise of the Children's Sexual Rights Campaign is that children, youth, like adults, they claim, have a right to experience sexual pleasure, to engage in sexual acts, and to access sexual information. And so as you can imagine, as a mom of 5 kids, it was concerning to me. And in fact, the more I read about it and the more I found out, that day that I found that document, I decided, okay, if this is real, this isn't going to happen in the world without me fighting it, without me finding some way to get involved to fight this. And so that's what started me down this road, actually, was that one document. And then the other thing is the issue of women's empowerment. Like, we hear so much talk about empowering women these days, but to say that we need to have so much emphasis on empowering women, the underlying premise behind that is that women don't inherently have power, which is not true.
They do in my world.
Right?
They seem to everywhere.
Right. And if you in a functional marriage, you understand that the power that your wife has and the influence she has.
Yes, I do.
But with women at large, there seems to be this focus on that we have to do something to empower them. And we don't. And in the course of things, I realized one specific insight that women are inherently powerful in the position that they have as mothers. And so those two things, which I hope we'll get to explore both of those things, kind of came together. And the interplay of those two things, so the children's sexual rights movement and how that interacts with women's empowerment, was really interesting to me. And so I had to write a book, and I had to let people know what was going on internationally with the family.
Okay, so there are other moms of 5 kids out there who also go on the internet, but they don't respond in the way that you did. So what? And I'm so grateful that you did.
Yeah.
But what's your background? Like, why were you researching this in the first place? And how did you?
Well, I was just interested in family topics and had, generally followed trends in family formation and different things that were happening in society, breakdown of family. So I was just interested in those types of topics and was kind of looking for a way to participate or to have a voice or to, make some difference. But at that point, I didn't realize, we all have kind of known that the family has been declining for a long time. But it's not until I got involved directly with the children's sexual rights movement and then at the United Nations, that I realized that there's actually a formalized, organized effort to crush the family. And one of the ways that that happens is through the children's sexual rights campaign and kind of the fallout, all the different tenets of that campaign.
So my gut reaction when I hear that children have sexual rights, the right to sexual relationships and sexual pleasure, my first instinct as a father is, those are my kids and you have no right to butt into the sexual lives of my children, and I'm armed, so back off. Like
right?
that really triggers me. I think most parents would feel that way. You're talking about sex and my kids, they're my kids.
Exactly. And the fact that they're your kids is prime, and your reaction is a natural and good one to protect your
you're
kids
a creep.
from these kinds of things.
This is a firearm, back off. Like that's literally how it makes me feel. What do most people not feel that way?
Well, I think most people do. In fact, when people really understand and see, like what we're going to talk about some of today and what's in the book, it shouldn't be a bipartisan issue even. All parents should be, and most are, alarmed at the content that's being aimed at young children and youth today. And so there's just children belong to their parents, right? And that's actually the crux of the other part of when I talked about women's empowerment. Well, why do children belong to their parents? And this is when I really got thinking deeply about this. So when a baby is born, how do we know who it belongs to? Because it comes out of the mother, right?
Right.
And
Yes.
and it's attached to the mother.
We can verify maternity, yes.
Right. I mean, there are some cases with reproduction where eggs have been swapped or something, but by and large, generally, historically, and even still in almost every instance today, how we know who a baby belongs to is becomes out of a mother. And it's in fact attached to the mother by an actual cord,
Yes.
the umbilical cord. And that's not insignificant. And so one of the things that I realized that I had to write the book is that, so there's these two views kind of in the world, right? There's kind of a privatization view where the world should be organized privately oriented and private ownership and so forth. And then there's another view that's more collectivist, even globalist. And so there's sort of these competing ideologies that go on in the world today. And then I got thinking about it. And if you think about it, Tucker, if a baby belongs to its mother, that's private belonging. It's not ownership, it's belonging. And so if a baby privately belongs to its mom, that is the first and the underlying and the most important relationship of sovereignty in the world. In fact, I would argue it's the only inherent relationship of government or sovereignty that naturally occurs, along with the sovereignty of the father. But it's less direct with the father.
Yes, it is.
Marriage, the way that a father claims his children is through his marriage to his wife.
Yes.
Because when you get married, one of the main reasons
and
you
service
do that,
to the children, providing for the children.
yes. When you get married, you're saying that you're going to be sexually exclusive. That's what most people are saying. When you're married, you're going to be sexually exclusive to that person. So any baby that comes out of the mother is going to be hers. And we can assume, and hope that the child will also be that father's baby.
Well, that's what we're really promising in church, right? At the ceremony
Yes.
is your babies will be mine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of people have lost that vision of marriage. We think it's just a fun, celebration of adults to get married. But what marriage does is ties the father to his children, allows him to claim
Yes,
them.
that's
the
right.
mother can naturally claim her children because
She has witnesses. Yeah.
she's there and it's her.
Yeah.
And so if you think about it, in a sense, anatomy itself, and God normally takes credit for designing anatomy if you believe in God. Even if you don't believe in God, the anatomy of women is still exists, and babies are born in a certain way. Why is that? And I think it's because privatization is the right way to go. So if you think about it, the mother, the fact that the mother gives birth to the baby and the baby is hers, if she says, this baby is mine, that means privatization has already won. That means that every time a baby is born, privatization is born with it. And so that's one reason why collectivism has never been successful. And in my study for this, it was really chilling, actually. I found the writings of a 1970s feminist named Shulamith Firestone. And she came to the same conclusion that I did, is that it's the private belonging of babies and children that underlie all the political structures of the world. That's why, like, instead of babies don't pop up in Cabbage Patches, right? That's the fable, but they don't really. Why is that? Because then anyone could take them. They wouldn't belong. Private belonging wouldn't exist. But because they come from the anatomy of women in cooperation with men, babies privately belong to somebody, and that somebody is always a woman originally. And it works out best if there's also the father.
Firestone hated this fact.
Well, she had a really interesting observation, though. She said she's a very raging, very much in favor of socialism. So she's a socialist radical feminist. But she said that she acknowledged the failures of past socialist enterprises and projects and even communes. And she said that the reason why socialism had never worked yet in the past is because we have not been, because of its failure to sever, in her words, the special cord tying connection between women and children. She said that. And when I read that, I said, yes, exactly. That's what keeps the world private rather than publicly regulated. Because families are a private institution. And she said, that's the problem, is that we haven't been able to sever that special relationship and actual tie between mothers and children. And so her solution is, then that is the thing we need to kill.
Yes.
That's the thing we need to put on the chopping block and fight at all costs. I take the opposite view. I take the view that that is the thing then that we need to honor and protect and respect through all generations of time. And that has been respected. The belonging of children to their own mothers and parents, that's something that has rarely been questioned, really in any culture, through time, because it's inherent. It happens without anyone making any laws about it. And there's no government needed.
So you really need to declare war on nature to change that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, how did Firestone, how did her own life wind up? Do you remember?
Very badly. Very badly.
So she wrote that book, I think, at 23. She was kind of a genius, Canadian, I think.
She was very smart.
Yeah, very smart. But she died alone in her apartment, and I think it was like a week before they found her because she had no ties. And I'm not mocking, but I'm just saying.
It's a very tragic story.
It's a tragic story.
And she before she died, she tried to eliminate her blood tie to her parents. She wrote them a letter trying to declare her independence to them and stuff. But you can't do that.
No.
Because once a child is born of two specific parents, that's unchangeable. Yes. Parents may leave, death may happen, abandonment may occur, different things, but the child is still
can't change your
parents.
genes.
You can't change it. Yeah.
So wow, you've thought very deeply about this. So it took you 3 years. I'm impressed. Give us the outlines of the organized effort to crush the family.
Okay, sure. So let me back up a little bit. So once I found out about the children's sexual rights regime, I quickly, miraculously found other people who were aware of this and had been working on it at the global level for some time. And so I became involved with some groups of people at the United Nations who were advocating for families and children. And so when I went to the UN that it really came into focus. So my first visit there was quite eye-opening. First of all, I heard people advocating for legalizing sex work, prostitution, people advocating for sexual rights for children. In one meeting I was in, they called pregnancy a career interruption. That's what they called it. And abortion was called a therapeutic interruption of pregnancy. So I kind of felt like I was in a different world. Who are these people that have these kind of seemingly radical ideas about pregnancy? Because, most people think of pregnancy as being, and childbearing as a joyful thing, but not so at the United Nations. And so I came to see that International Planned Parenthood Federation, who wrote the document that I talked to you, it's called the Exclaim document, has a huge seat at the world table at the United Nations. They're official partners with the World Health Organization, with UNESCO, and all these other United Nations agencies. So they have a huge presence at the United Nations. So there's UNESCO is the United Nations Education, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. So it's a behemoth organization that takes it upon itself to kind of direct the educational efforts of the world, and they try to shape the way education works in the world. UNICEF also is a partner in this. They are supposed to act as a global protection for children, particularly children in crisis. But unfortunately, and the World Health Organization as well is the United Nations entity. A lot of people don't realize that they are directly connected. And so the United Nations, originally was established in 1948 with somewhat noble views, trying to keep the world out of war and so forth. But the thing is, and that I've seen with my own eyes, is that the whole thing has been significantly corrupted by the sexual rights campaign, particularly for children. And it's very organized, highly funded. All the nations of the world, essentially contribute to the United Nations, and then those monies are used to enact certain programs. And unfortunately, many of those programs, I'm not saying all of the things that come out of the United Nations are necessarily bad, but there are some very concerning, very troubling things that are coming out, especially in relation to children's sexual rights. It might be helpful. Should I read a couple of quotes from the sexual rights material?
I have some, and I want to put them on the screen because I think that they really tell the story so well. Here's the first one. It is a fact, as you just said, that babies belong to their mothers and fathers. At first blush, this fact may seem unrelated to the United Nations and the global fight to commandeer the world, but it is, in fact, the crux of the issue. The quest to unseat mothers and fathers, disband the family, and place the reins of life in less noble hands is what the battle at the UN and beyond is all about. The armaments currently arrayed against the family are daunting, but not invincible. This book will show you why. Nicely written. You're a nice writer.
Thank you.
In addition to being a clear thinker. So that really is the point. But I guess before we proceed, I just have to ask once again, why? Of all the institutions you'd want to destroy, the family seems like the most nurturing, the most positive, and the most basic and natural. You get rid of the family, what do you have?
Well, it is all those things. It's also the most powerful. It's the most powerful. If you think about it, the great thinkers through the ages, for instance, Aristotle said the fate of nations depends on the education of youth. Lenin said, give me 4 years to teach the children, and the seeds I have sown will never be uprooted. And Hitler himself said, he who owns the youth gains the future. So it's the people who get access to the minds of the youth who essentially control the destiny of the world. And, there's a lot of people talk about this idea. Sir Herbert Reed also said, if you want to have real change, real societal change, you have to get to the minds of the children. That's why. And so if you think about it, so not only is the mother the first possessor of all humans come through a mother. She's like the gatekeeper of life in connection with a father. And so if it's a fact that the person who has access to the minds of the young and gains the love and allegiance of the young are most powerful, if that's true, what does that mean for a mother? Because when every young human is born, they come to her lap, to her specifically. And she has been throughout all time, and mostly to this day remains the first influencer of every child ever born.
So it's a little weird to tell someone in that position you're powerless. It seems just the opposite. If you're the mom, your power is inherent. If you're the dad, you have to earn your power. If you're the mom, you're born with it. So why would we tell those people you have no power? What a weird thing to say to them.
Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
But think about it. When is the last time that you heard motherhood portrayed as a position of power and prestige and joy? Maybe on Mother's Day, but in general, motherhood gets a very bad rap. It's oppressive, and you're tied down to your kids. And I'm not denying that there's a great deal of work involved with motherhood, but she also holds the key position of power because she influences little children in their first life lessons. And that's what every kind of savvy reformer is trying to do. Like Hitler had his youth battalion, and Mao had his Red Guards and so forth. So people are always trying to get to the youth.
And not just the youth. I mean, I just finished a biography of a soldier from the First World War who served 4 years in the First World War. Only guy in his unit to survive. And he said the one thing almost every dying man said in his last moments on Earth was mom, calling out for his mother. Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
So, you know, you're shot in the face and the last thing you say is your mother's name. Like that, it tells you that's not a powerless position being mom, is it? Yes, it does.
No, it's a powerful position, and that's a position I think that's a story that needs to be told. That's the deal. Like I was saying with women's empowerment, we're like, oh, poor women, we need to do something and enact laws to empower them. They already have power.
But wait, what they're saying is you need to go work at Google. And like you'll be more powerful in the PR or legal department at some big company than you are with your own family. I mean, it's really corporate propaganda, is it not?
It kind of is. And I'm not against necessarily women functioning in the public sphere, working, having jobs, but that's still not more powerful than what they do at home. And it's not more important than what they do at home.
Well, it's really not morally superior to work for Microsoft than it is to have children, is it? But that's really what they're saying.
And that's largely kind of the feeling in society today that it is. It's more important, more prestigious, more powerful to have any other position than to. So
there's a member of Congress who's both stupid and loathsome, but I must say the one good thing about her is she's so dumb she tells the truth. Her name is Katie Porter. She's from California. And she said this a couple of weeks ago after that decision on the opinion on Roe v. Wade was leaked about abortion and work. Watch this. This is Katie Porter of California.
The fact that things like inflation can happen and it can become more expensive to feed your kids and to fuel your car is exactly why people need to be able to be in charge of how many mouths they're going to have to feed. So I think the fact that we're seeing this jump in expenses, that we're seeing people having to pay more in the grocery store, pay more at the pump, pay more for housing, is a reason that people are saying, I need to be able to make my own decisions about when and if to start a family.
I love that. So the economy goes south, and a normal person would say, it's harder to feed my kids. Lower inflation. Right. Katie Porter looks at this and says, have more abortions.
Mm-hmm. Eliminate more babies.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It just kind of tells you everything about the mindset here. But you think the reason they're so opposed to the family and to more children is because it's an autonomous unit they can't control.
Exactly. It's like what Firestone said. That's the great obstacle. It's like the tripwire. The family is a tripwire for like the ogre of globalist domination. And it's the thing that they just can't get over. And it's almost indestructible. That's why I say the Invincible Family. How do you get rid of mothers? How are you going to do that? That's tough.
It is tough.
And you know, there's so much talk about world powers. I mean, you know, we have China rattling its sabers over here and Russia storming in over there and North Korea threatening or whatever. But the real world power, the original world power, is mothers. And that's not going to change anytime soon. And if we have, you know, these reformers wanting to march in and start sexual rights activists wanting to march in and take control of our kids, we're not having that. The mothers of the world are 2 billion strong. And we fight hard. And when it comes to our kids, we don't give up ever. And so I think as these efforts to sexualize our kids and teach them untrue things that parents aren't in agree with, as those progress, we're already beginning to see it. But I think we're going to see it even in a more spectacular way. The mothers and fathers of the world stand up and take the power that is already theirs and realize that they already have it. No one needs to give it to them. No other laws need to be enacted. We already have as parents the power that we need.
I want to read a second quote from your book, which I think is just so brilliant. So basically, you're contrasting family life with the alternative that they're hoping to provide, which is some sort of collective responsibility, letting the village raise your kid.
Yes.
Right. And you write this. When was the last time you went to a state-run facility and wished you could stay there forever? I'm stealing that line. Do you crave the feelings of warmth, joy, and love you feel when you go to the DMV? This is the grand future of the world if the UN gets its way. If the UN gets its way, childhood will become a mammoth stint at the DMV, and so will old age. Caring for the young and the old will not be done out of love, but rather out of a duty to equality and to liberate women from their own children and families. To liberate women from their own children and families. Mm-hmm. What a perverse idea.
And yet it's so pervasive. that we've got to free. This is one of the core tenets of socialism. The writings of Marx and Engels, they said we have to free women. It's always couched in terms of freeing women from care of their own children. And what it really does is free men from responsibility for their sexual choices. Because if children, in the socialist...
The greatest scam ever run.
Yeah, in the socialist plan, the plan is parents don't take care of their own kids because that's oppressive, and doing it for free is the epitome of oppression. But in their writings, the care of children is going to become, quote, a public affair. So the guy can have sex with whoever he wants, the women can give birth, and somebody else takes care of it all. And that even still, to some degree, is kind of the utopia that is being sought for. But it's a bad plan, and it's not focused on love. See, the family model isn't based on earnings. It isn't based on money. And the first thing when a mother has her child, the first thought for her almost never is, who's going to pay me to take care of this thing? She loves her baby. She loves it. She wants to take care of it. And any decent man wants to take care of his child as well. And so the whole cradle of humanity, the place where every person starts, is or should be a situation of love. And no one pays you for that. And for some reason, those forces at work seem to say, well, it'll be better if there's a paid person raising humanity. Somehow that's more noble or moral. But it isn't. It isn't. It's better if people who love the child are raising the child.
So we're back to the corporate theme. They want to commercialize even the family. The first thing the Soviets did in 1917, and the same with the Communist Party of China in the early 20s when they started, was to legalize abortion. First thing. Is that, that's just inherent to their plan, isn't it then?
Sure. And even if you pivot and look to China, socialist communist state, they don't respect private property, right? And so if you live in that kind of a situation, a society, you also don't respect the private rights of parents, the belonging of children to their parents. And so if you're going to control all capital in a society, as they would in a communist situation, you also have to, and especially have to, commandeer the contents of the womb, human capital. And that's what they did in China. Horrible, horrible stories, of the one-child policy. Forced abortions happened all the time. Babies were ripped from their mother's wombs against their will millions of times over because the Chinese government didn't see the child as her child, as the mother's child. They saw it as theirs to do with as they pleased. And they saw it as a disposable liability rather than a beautiful possibility, which is what most parents see their children as.
You said that women won't put up with this. I'm starting to think that maybe men will. I would say the overwhelming majority of people we get on our nighttime show who are upset about what the state politicians are trying to do to their kids are women. You don't see too many men stepping forth. Why have you noticed this? I have noticed it. And because I work in circles where there's, scores of women, moms who are fighting ferociously. We don't see men as often. Part of that, I hope, a lot of that is they're at work, like at least in my circles, and they're supporting their wives in the work that they're doing. So, my husband, the husband of all the women that I work, our husbands are firmly on board with this effort. But you're right, we need to see men showing up more in a visible way, which is beginning to happen. Same thing with a father. Those children are his. And he has every right to stand up for what they're being taught in the public square and public school, or even the culture, trying to influence culture in good and positive ways. We need men to come to the table. So when the UN writes a declaration or supports a declaration of sexual rights for children, when Planned Parenthood writes it and they support it, how does it filter down to the lives of your kids or mine? Right. So this is something that I learned through my own experience and then my own research, and it's actually quite chilling. So there is a direct line leading down from the United Nations, and it's largely socialist and sexual rights-based ideologies, down to the classroom.
And this is what I think a lot of people don't know and aren't seeing today. And I outline it in a full chapter in the book, but just in simple terms. So there's the United Nations agencies at the top, and then there's the Sustainable Development Goals, which laced in there are sexual rights issues. When you read carefully, they're there, and they produce videos to this effect, showing how children's sexual rights are connected to the SDGs and so forth. And then coming down a little bit more, you mentioned different documents that the United Nations puts out. So one of those documents is called the Incheon Declaration, and it's an education document for the world that was negotiated in 2015. And but then there's a lot of documents like that try to, although they're not binding documents or legal documents per se, they do have huge influence in society, and UNESCO puts them forward as if they are, gospel truth, kind of. And so then one of the major, in the Incheon Declaration, one of the major entities that's specifically cited as needing to be part of the global education regime is an organization called the Global, the name is escaping me now.
Well, it's all right.
Anyway, there's a global education entity, and they are specifically cited as being the coordinators of this global kind of education situation. And that's interesting because their philosophy goes right along with the communist philosophy for education. In my study, I ran across a quote from an early Russian communist, and he said that the family was a corrupting influence on children, that we needed to rescue children from the influence of the family, and that from the earliest ages that children should find themselves under the influence of communist schools. And then he said something telling. He said that our job is to get the mother to relinquish her child to the state. And one thing you'll notice in there was he was acknowledging the mother's prior right to her child. Because if you have to get her to give it up,
course,
which you do, then it means she has a prior right. But so the whole idea of, and so then from then he says, okay, so we need to rescue kids from the family. We need to provide, schools that will raise children for the first basically 2 decades of their lives. And how we're going to do that is we're going to make schools, he went on to explain, we're going to make schools full service centers that provide all of the medical and educational and social and emotional and even spiritual needs that a child has. Okay, so that is the communist kind of philosophy on education. Are we seeing that today? We're seeing that in a huge way today. I wrote an article recently on the community schools effort. And it sounds so lovely, and it sounds like so helpful that one idea attached to the community schools. So Arne Duncan, who was in the, the
Education Secretary under
Obama, he was a huge proponent of the community schools movement. And he said that the school should become the heart of family life. Not the home, the school should become the heart of family life. He also said we should work to attach medical centers to all schools so that it would be a one-stop shop for kids. And that their emotional needs and counseling and everything would be provided through the school. What does that sound like? It sounds like this communist guy.
Of course.
What he said. It's the same. And so this is what we're steering back even more drastically from a family model to a school model. And we keep empowering schools. Even just in my local school district, a couple of weeks ago, they're trying to implement new social and emotional programs for our children, which that's not the role of a school, in my opinion, and many parents' opinion. And so I went to the meeting where they were displaying, the various programs that they were going to choose from and letting parents give input. But as I got looking at it and asking some questions, there were 7 kind of programs that we could choose from. And all 7 of them were aligned with the CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, for the CASEL's international guidelines for social emotional learning. Well, it just so happens that in part of this web going from the United Nations down to your child's school, CASEL is a major player. And so even though we have the choice of all these programs for our kids, they're all aligned with the global standards already. And CASEL directly partners with UNESCO and other entities from the United Nations and down the line. And another player in this is whole kind of global regime that's using education to push sexual rights and a socialist agenda is the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And so they were originally established after World War II to help nations recover from the devastation of the war. Well, they're up to new things these days, and I've outlined it all in the book, but excuse me. One of the main things they do is facilitate student assessments. So PISA testing, it's the Program for International Student Assessment. And so rather than saving the world from whatever they were saving it from before, wars or whatever, now they're invested in education in a very serious way. Very directly. The OECD is a member of the UN Global Compact, so they're all in cooperation working towards the same goals. And so the OECD gives these student assessments. And when it started out, they were billed as just purely academic testing to see how the kids at your school and in your district are doing, on their academic skills, which seems sort of reasonable, except it was aligned globally, which was a little weird. But then things started to change. So a few years down the line, the OECD started changing that they wanted to assess not only kids' academic skills, but their social and emotional skills. And then that wasn't quite enough, and they were morphing again. And now they want to not only assess, but influence children's social and emotional skills and attitudes so that they will align with the global attitudes that UN and the Sustainable Development Goals support. And these are things that parents would never know about.
This is so aggressive. It's remarkable how they feel, speaking of empowerment, empowered to just get in there and rearrange your kid's mind. Mm-hmm. That's so far outside the scope of what schools are supposed to be doing in the minds of most people that they don't ask permission, they just do it.
Yeah, and it's quite chilling because parents would never know. And the other piece of this with the OECD and the testing and so forth, data collection is a huge part of this whole puzzle. And so they're collecting data on each individual kid. Now, in some ways that could be helpful, like if a kid is consistently answering the wrong answer on a times table or whatever, then a responsive computer program could adjust and keep asking the child so that they could eventually learn that in a different way. But the problem is those same kind of learning systems are being used now to assess and influence children's attitudes and behaviors. These are the words they use, that they need to influence children's attitudes and behaviors about social issues. Instead of just social and emotional skills, now we have being a good global citizen and those kinds of skills. And so there's a huge opportunity that they've created for themselves, as you say, to just take charge and influence the minds of little children. So
why are so education even now is determined mostly at the state level, I think. Mm-hmm. Why you live in the state of Utah, I think. Uh-huh. So why would Spencer Cox, your governor, why would he say, wait a second, why is the UN affecting what our schools teach? Or whatever, it doesn't need to be your state, any state. Why would any governor go
I actually use my state as an example in the book. And because, if the things that are taught in local schools have traditionally been supposed to be controlled locally, and the national government is not supposed to interfere. But as we know, that's being chipped away at for years, and now federal funding. We have the whole, Education Department of the United States, which spends billions of dollars a year accomplishing what? Not much, because that hasn't helped our kids a lot. So technically there's not supposed to be a global control of education, but what has happened has been that various entities have gone around campaigning to the governors and state school boards and so forth to get people to voluntarily come on board. It usually starts with a pilot program. That's how it's worked in my state. They say, hey, we have this great pilot program that we want you to try, and of course there's incentives to get you to try it, and they're all aligned with global standards. And so then that's how you get in the foot in the door. And then we start to see, oh, well, of course schools should be interested in kids' social and emotional wellness. So what are the programs that we need to get to make that happen? Well, conveniently, they already have these programs in place. And so it's all very connected. And so I think we've seen a lot of, probably you, like many parents, have been alarmed over the past couple of years at what has seemed like a rapid change in education. Wouldn't you say, like with...
I've missed it because our children are a little bit older, but I wouldn't put up with
like
it
with
if I was...
CRT, critical race theory, all these kind of big changes, teaching gender theory at schools. There's been kind of a palpable change in education, and things are, and a lot of parents are like, wait, what? I thought when I grew up, I was just going to school to read and write. What is all this? And it seemed very sudden. But what I've learned from being involved at the United Nations is that it hasn't been subtle at all. And it's been going on for decades, laying the groundwork for this. So like in my state, there's collaboration. They come and say, hey, we're going to give your school a bunch of free Chromebooks. And then there's always strings attached. And so then they're laying the technical foundation with Chromebooks and other things to be involved in local education under the guise of local control. But that is slowly disappearing.
So if you were to do it again, what would you do for education for your children?
Well, I have 4 older daughters, and then a 12-year gap, and I have a little boy. And so we're in that boat right now, considering what we are going to do with our little guy, because it's just not acceptable for me to send him to a school that's going to be teaching them that he is not a boy.
Right.
Or trying to change that behind the parents' backs. And so, but the good news for education, though, I'm talking about all these scary things and how there's a line from the United Nations down to your child's school. And sadly, there is, that we need to be aware of and be fighting against. But the good news is that there are also now, people are kind of breaking free from the idea that public school is the only choice, the only valid choice.
Yes.
And not just homeschool, which is an option, but there's so many educational choices and hybrids of things and tutors. And I mean, there's always been private schools, of course, and now there's charter schools, and there's just a lot of different co-ops. Again, I think parents are realizing, wait, we already have the power. Like, we don't have to wait for somebody to start a school.
No, that's right. We can opt out.
We can opt out. We can start our own thing.
So
we can band together with other parents.
Tell us about the co-op model. What is that exactly?
Well, that's something that I personally haven't participated in, but I know many families that have. I know families, in my neighborhood that they, I guess most people would call it a homeschool, but they have different parents who specialize in different things and teach the kids those things. And then, the parents kind of swap around, because it's not as if any of us can't teach our kid to read and write, right?
Well, it's not like any of us are less impressive than the people who will be teaching them to read or write in the public schools. I mean, have you seen who works there?
Right. And my personal experience with my children has been fairly positive in the public schools, but I'm just afraid that that's not going to be the case for very much longer. Even I mentioned the OECD, in one of their documents, I believe it was in 2018, when it kind of a global document that was supposed to influence education, they said that they expected that curricula would need to change in radical ways to respond to or to facilitate social change. And so we had warning, it's not secret. They're seeking to initiate social change, and they're seeking to do it through the education systems of the world. And so we have seen the curriculum change in radical ways in the past 2 years. That's because the infrastructure and the relationships between these organizations were already in place. And so it wasn't very drastic to
It
make
wasn't
that
just
happen.
George Floyd ODing on drugs in Minneapolis. It was like, this was ready to go.
It was ready to go.
So what do you do if you're a parent? Like, what's the likelihood if you're a parent of, say, a 6th grader that you're going to find out what your kids are actually learning?
Well, it depends on how invested and investigative you are as a parent, right? And again, I think parents need to realize that they are in charge of their children's education, even in the UN's own documents, even in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. One of the things that's in there is parents have a prior right to decide on what kind of education their children will receive. Not that we need a UN document to tell us that, because we already have it, but it's even in their documents, but they don't respect that. There's all kinds of other documents at work and programs at work. One thing I haven't mentioned yet that's really important. So there's all these ideals about children's sexual rights, and that children should be accessing sexual activities and pleasures. And so how do you teach that to kids? How do you get that message to them? And the answer is largely through comprehensive sexuality education. And and the people I'm affiliated with are not opposed to sex education per se, but we are opposed to comprehensive sexuality education because it's this very aggressive, to most parents, very radical form of sex ed that is rights-based. And they are proud of that. But the thing is, they just declare that sex and sexual pleasure are human rights for kids. And most parents just fundamentally disagree.
I'm not even sure what that means, but I do know that if I walk up to an 8-year-old in the park and start talking about sex, I'm arrested. Mm-hmm. So why is no one arresting the teacher? I think the teacher should be arrested for saying that.
This is a question that we need to be asking, right?
I'm dead serious. Like, why are they walking free? That sounds like a felony to me. It sounds like child molestation, actually, but it's not somehow, because why?
The thing is, it's always couched in very beautiful terms.
Yeah, I don't care.
And they've made it look so appealing, and not everything about it is bad. So it can be sold pretty easily to school districts or state school boards or whatever, and they're not in most cases they're not even aware of what they're getting into and what at least some of the content really is, and it's very troubling, very disturbing in a way that most parents on either side of the political spectrum would be concerned about.
Yeah. I just want to hit one more point that you make in the book, which I thought was so interesting and smart. And I'm quoting now from the book. What the globalists, socialists at the UN and elsewhere are talking about when they refer to redistributing women and girls' disproportionate burden of unpaid care, let me repeat that, redistributing women and girls' disproportionate burden of unpaid care, is making virtually all roles in society public roles so that all people contribute directly to the economy and to the gross domestic product. They want the public and private spheres to be reconciled, in other words, equalized, and to fall under the same scrutiny and control. They want to essentially eliminate the privateness of the private sphere. Mm-hmm. Where does that phrase, redistributing women and girls' disproportionate burden of unpaid care, come from?
Well, that particular document, I believe, was presented at the Commission on the Status of Women at the United Nations just a few years ago. And so, it goes back to the philosophy that women taking care of their own children for free is oppression.
But why is that? Let's just take 3 steps back. Why is it anybody's business how you structure your own family?
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean? Like, why did someone at the UN or in the Biden administration or at the Pentagon, they did a lot of this in Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. We don't like the way their family structures work. Mm-hmm. Really? Your job is to bomb things you don't like. Why are you getting involved in gender roles in Afghanistan? Like, why do they feel empowered to get into stuff that's not their business?
Right. It isn't their business at all. And yet they've made it their business. So now we have to.
Good point.
Good point.
Here I am barking like an old guy at the obvious. Why is it this way? Sorry, excuse me. It doesn't enrage me, though.
No, understandably. And in that same document, one of the solutions that they put forth, I believe it was the same document anyway, a similar one if it wasn't that one, was that they wanted to see national care centers set up to take care of children and anyone else needing care. Again, in the name of saving women from taking care of their own families and children.
It's pretty hard, though. I mean, it's easy for, you and I are married, big families, mm-hmm. Functional marriages, whatever. You kind of need 2 parents if you've got a bunch of kids, mm-hmm. obviously. But if you don't have 2 parents, you're pretty vulnerable to this stuff, aren't you?
Yeah, it's tough. Anytime that a marriage, a family is broken apart, or it's going to be problematic.
But you become a lot more dependent on the government the second there's not a mom and a dad at home.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And unfortunately, many of our policies are incentivize single parenthood rather than the opposite, rather than incentivizing, getting married, being married, raising your own kids. But yeah, it puts people in a tough position when marriages fall apart, because then what are they going to do? They need help. So
maybe that's the point of disincentivizing marriage.
Mm-hmm. Again, there's the family is the source of the greatest power and the greatest influence, because parents can teach their kids whatever they want. whatever they want. And most parents do a pretty good job of it. Not all parents, we have to acknowledge, not because just because of family, not everything is always rosy, but in most cases, parents do the best job of caring for and teaching and loving their own kids. Why? Because it's a private entity and they possess their own children and they feel and they have responsibility for their own kids.
So I can't resist asking you in closing, since you do have 5 children, and I'm envious. Looking back on that, you said 4 of them are older. Like, what are the most important things you've taught your kids in retrospect?
What sort of most important things I taught my kids? Well, can I share a quick story?
Of course.
Near the close of the book, I talk about Hungary and how the parents of Hungary reacted when their children were forced to go into communist schools, right? So after World War II, the communist forces came in, Hungary was invaded by communist rule, and that maintained for decades. But that was problematic for the Hungarian parents because they agree with what was being taught to their children in these communist schools. And so it became so unbearable to these Hungarian parents that they decided to rebel. And they did it in a super ingenious way, and in a way that all parents can do, which is becoming more relevant, I think, to us today. So they had to send their kids to communist schools all day long, being taught the glories of socialism and how Hungary was bad and their parents were bad, and how we had to trust our communist leaders. And so there would come a point, though, and I take this from another book that tells the story of these wonderful parents, but there was a specific family, and they, like many others, decided, we're not having this. We're going to take control of our kids. But you have to wait till your kids are old enough to understand not to reveal what the family's doing outside of the home. So anyway, there came a point when these parents literally went to the cellar and began to teach their children the truth about the history of Hungary, about the communists, about the socialist ideals, And so there's this one family in particular that they had 2 kids. A girl, I think, was 13 and the boy was 9. And they eventually escaped from communist Hungary. But they escaped with their not only their national pride intact, but their family values intact. And so when people got asking them, how did you do this? How did you do this with your kids? How did you save your kids from all this communist propaganda that was in these schools? And the mother said, we did 2 things. Every day, after they went to school and at night, we would go down to the cellar and we would wash away every evil thing they might have heard that day before they went to bed. And someone asked her, well, how did you know what to teach them? And she said, books. So she had some secret books that taught the true history of Hungary. And she had her kids memorize that. And they had these lessons at night. They had these conversations at night where they studied religion and they studied history, true history. And they intentionally, I love how she said, we washed away the evil things they might have heard that day. Every day they did this. And it worked. And she said, the mother of the family said, it was like the communists were pushing us down every day at school, and every day we rose up strong again. And we taught our kids commitment to family and to God. And we can do that exact same thing. And hopefully, we all hope that it doesn't come to those severe circumstances. We're not quite there yet, but there are forces at work in the world that are very destructive of what many people fundamentally believe in. And so we're going to have to be serious about teaching our children the truth about what we believe. And so you asked me what I've taught my children and what I hope, all of us, so there is a hopeful message here, because even though there's this kind of global campaign to crush motherhood and fatherhood, they really can't win for 2 reasons. First of all, because the anatomy of women is going to keep birthing privatization over and over, and you can't stop it. And also, parents are going to teach their children, and children are going to listen because they know that they're loved by their parents. Yeah. And so we need to teach our children first of all, what we believe about sex, marriage, gender, and the family. And consistently, not just a one-time talk. Like, these are conversations that we need to be having with our kids. And that's something everyone can do, no matter their circumstances. Yes. And so as far as other things that we need to do, we need to Bring back chastity, right? One of the things that we need to teach our children is chastity. Don't have sex before you're married. I was doing a podcast some time ago, and this guy in his 20s asked me, what advice do you have for people my age? And I said, don't have sex before you're married. And then after you're married, don't have sex with anyone else. This is how family formation, this should be obvious, right? And then...
Yeah, not obvious.
And then when a family is in place and sexual exclusivity is in place by covenant and, law in marriage, then have babies. And don't be afraid to have babies. And I've heard some people saying, oh, this world is so terrible, I don't want to bring children into it. Well, you know what's going to make the world better? Babies, new people. And you're going to teach them true things. And then they're going to grow up to detonate rebellions that need to happen, to just live moral lives, to be great, moral, solid people. That's what we need. We don't need less babies. We need more. We need more good, moral children who are being raised up by great parents. And then we need to frame motherhood as not some drudgery that is shackles for women. It's the most joyful and difficult experience that life has to offer. I laughed out loud in the study of the book. I came across a quote by Simone de Beauvoir, an early feminist from like the 1950s, and she said, gestation offers no benefit to the woman. I was like, wait a minute, what? Gestation offers no benefit to the woman? You mean having a baby and being able to possess and command and love a living soul?
Now,
That's not a
how much
benefit?
do you know about her? Do you think she had a happy life?
No, she didn't either. In fact, none of the radical,
she didn't.
None of the radical feminists that I've studied and that you know about, right? Their lives turned to shattered. It was a mess.
Yeah.
Right?
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work. And so we've got to be there. A couple other things we need to do policy-wise. We have to cut ties with federal and global education programs. We need to relocalize our control of education. That's something that just has to be done, and that governors and others locally can do. They're just mostly afraid to do it. And so we need to relocalize control. Another obvious thing is to defund the children's sexual rights movement. Any entity that wants to be in schools or anywhere that around kids, they need to be defunded if they're children's sexual rights.
If they're talking to your 8-year-old about sex, they need to be in jail. It's not.
It should be obvious.
Not allowed.
But
Yeah,
it's
not allowed.
Yeah. And another thing that people, I would highly suggest for people to do, I'm part of a coalition that's designed, the Protect Child Health Coalition. We can go to stopcse.org, and there is a video there. Make sure your kids aren't around. It's quite shocking, but explains about the Children's Sexual Rights Campaign and kind of how it works in connection with sexual education at school. So stopcse.org. It's the main video that comes up there, so you can watch that and be educated, so that then you know how to fight it locally, and you'll want to fight it after you watch the video. But the hopeful thing is, this other global side and all this education, even with the billions of dollars that they have at their disposal and all the money that International Planned Parenthood Federation has, they're not going to win. They're not going to, because families will retain their power and mothers and fathers will rise to the occasion. And I think as things become more perilous, that choice will be presented to us. And I hope and I think that most parents are going to cast their vote in favor of their families, in favor of their children. That it's not a waste of your life and your time to have children and to raise them.
That's all that matters.
Right? That's all that matters.
I couldn't agree more. Kimberly Ells, great book, great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm glad that you found that on the internet so many years ago.
Me too. It's been quite a ride. Thank you.
Tucker Carlson Day is the name of the show. New episodes 3 days a week on Fox Nation. Of course, we will see you every weeknight, forever, at 8 p.m. the Fox News Channel.